The distress signal tore through space like a scream in the darkness. The ISS Pioneer, a colony ship carrying 5,000 humans, had entered the Outer Rim region with hope in every crew member's heart. They were going to build something new. They were going to create a home on the distant world called Kepler 442b. But hope died fast when the swarms arrived. Captain Nathan Ford stood on the bridge of the Pioneer, watching as hostile shapes emerged from the darkness. They were not ships. They were creatures. Millions of them. The Vexter swarms came in waves. Biological horrors born from a star system that nobody understood and nobody wanted to understand. Each creature was the size of a small fighter with jagged armor and hunger in their eyes. They did not negotiate. They did not think. They only consumed. The scanners showed the terrifying truth. The swarms were moving at impossible speeds, cutting through the Pioneer's outer defenses. The ship's weapons fired back, creating bright explosions in the void, but the creatures kept coming. They were endless. For every swarm killed, 10 more replaced it. The Pioneer was being surrounded, squeezed like a hand closing around something fragile. Nathan ordered emergency signals sent to every frequency. They knew Earth would hear this. Earth always heard. Humans had learned long ago how to listen across the stars, how to reach through the darkness and make contact with distant voices. The signal was strong and clear. It carried everything they had to say. Come help us. Come save us. We are dying out here. But Nathan did not know that others were listening too. The Kelmvir Collective was listening. The Kelmvir were the oldest advanced species in the Galactic Council. They had technology that could bend light itself. They had weapons that could erase entire civilizations. They had ruled the Council for 500 years without challenge, and they intended to keep it that way. Their ambassador, Vexter the Wise, received the Earth distress signal and made a simple decision. He blocked it. Vexter stood in the council chamber, a being of pure crystalline form that reflected light in ways that hurt to look at. The chamber was round, built high above a planet of glass and silence. Representatives from every major species attended the council, but the Kelmvir controlled everything. Vexter's voice carried absolute authority. He spoke to the council about the signal, but what he said was not true. A primitive species calls for aid, Vexter announced. The humans are developing weapons of their own. They hide their true capabilities from the galaxy. If we respond to this distress call, we may be walking into a trap. They may use our aid against us. They may use it against all of us. The other representatives listened and grew afraid. Fear was easy to spread, especially when it came from someone as powerful as the Kelmvir. Fear was a weapon, and Vexter was a master of weapons. I propose we seal this frequency, Vexter continued. No species will respond. We will let the humans solve their own problems. If they are truly advanced enough to survive, they will survive. If not, then the galaxy is safer for their absence. The council voted. The vote was not even close. The humans would get no help. The distress signal would be jammed on all frequencies accessible to the galactic community. The Kelmvir had spoken, and no one dared to challenge them. But on Earth, 3 billion kilometers away, someone was listening on a channel that the Kelmvir did not know about. The channel was old and secret. It had been built during the final days of the Cold War, when humanity feared itself more than it feared the darkness. The channel was encrypted 17 times over. It was buried so deep in military installations that only the highest commanders knew it existed. When the ISS Pioneer sent its distress call, that old secret channel carried the message to the heart of human power. Admiral Gregory Hayes stood in a military command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The command center was older than most of the people who worked there. It smelled like machine oil and human fear. Screens surrounded him. each one showing data that most people would never know about. He read the distress signal and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Get me the President. We are going to war." The room exploded into motion. Soldiers moved fast. Officers shouted orders. Messages were sent to places that most of humanity did not know existed. There were fleets hidden in the asteroid belt. There were weapons platforms orbiting the moon. There was a military force that humanity kept secret from the entire universe, waiting for a moment exactly like this. Earth was a harsh world, the kind of place where a species learned to be ready for anything. Humanity had not survived by being weak. Commander Margaret Collins stood on the surface of Kepler 442b in a defensive bunker. The colony had been built deep into the stone, protected by walls 3 meters thick. But the walls would not hold forever. The Vexter swarms were landing on the surface now, cutting through the atmosphere like meteors. She could hear the impacts from where she stood. The ground shook with each one. Margaret was not a large person. She was not the strongest or the fastest person in the colony. But she was the leader, and leaders had to lead. She activated the colony's communication network and spoke to every person who could hear her. "We are going to hold this position," she said. Her voice was steady and true. "We are going to survive. Help is coming. I do not know how I know this, but I know it with everything I am. Earth will not let us fall. We just have to be brave enough to last until they arrive." The creatures outside the bunker began to attack the walls. They used their claws, their teeth, their raw strength. The walls held, but only barely. And above, in the darkness of space, humanity's hidden fleet accelerated toward the outer rim. They were coming faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were coming with fury and with purpose. They were coming to save their people, and nothing was going to stop them. The war that would change everything was about to begin. The human fleet moved through the darkness like hunters who had caught the scent of blood. Captain Lucas Hayes stood in the bridge of the flagship, the ISS Retaliation, and watched the star maps light up with their approach vectors. The fleet was not large by galactic standards. It was far smaller than the armadas the Kelmvir or the Valorian Dominion could field. But it was deadly. It was fast. It was born from a world that knew how to fight. Lucas had been a soldier his entire life. His father had been a soldier. His grandfather had been a soldier. The Hayes family had learned long ago that the universe did not reward kindness. The universe rewarded strength, speed, and the willingness to do what others would not. Lucas had 23 warships under his command. Each one was faster than anything the galactic community had ever seen. Each one carried weapons that violated at least 15 different galactic treaties. He did not care about the treaties. His people were dying. The Retaliation's engines burned hot as the ship accelerated. The human fleet had started from a hidden position near Saturn. They had jumped through space at velocities that should have destroyed their ships. But humans had built their ships differently. They had built them strong. They had built them to survive punishment that would break alien technology into pieces. Now those ships were cutting through the darkness, racing toward the outer rim with everything they had done in the depths of the ship. The crew prepared for battle. Lieutenant Sarah Kennedy moved through the weapons section, checking systems, making sure every weapon was ready. She had dark hair tied back tight, and her hands moved with perfect precision. She had been trained to kill. She had been trained to win. The targeting computers hummed beneath her fingers as she calibrated them for maximum destruction. Around her, dozens of other soldiers did the same thing. They knew their job. They knew what they had to do. Lucas watched the tactical displays and felt the weight of command. 5,000 people were dying on the colony world. 5,000 more depended on his decisions in the next few hours. The Vexter swarms were primitive, but they were numerous. Numbing did not matter if you had enough firepower. And Lucas had plenty of firepower. Time to contact? He asked his navigation officer. 42 minutes, sir, came the reply. 42 minutes. In that time, the swarms would kill more colonists. In that time, the defenses on Kepler 442b would weaken. In that time, history would move forward and people would die. Lucas accepted this. A soldier always had to accept the weight of time and death. It was part of the job. On the colony world, Commander Margaret Collins watched her people fight and survive. The bunker had become a fortress. The walls had been reinforced with every material the colony could find. Weapons had been assembled from old technology, from mining equipment, from anything that could shoot or explode. The colonists had transformed themselves into soldiers. They had no choice. The creatures outside the bunker had adapted. They were intelligent in some basic way, responding to tactics, changing their attacks. Margaret watched them on the security cameras and learned their patterns. She fed that information to the soldiers, telling them where to aim, how to time their shots. She was not a trained warrior, but she was smart. Smart people could lead. Smart people could keep other people alive. A young woman named Emma Torres worked beside Margaret in the command station. Emma had been a doctor before this. Now she was a communications officer, relay orders and casualty reports. She had seen bad things in the last few hours. She had watched people die on the screens. But she kept working. She kept talking. She kept doing her job. "We have wounded in Section 4, Emma reported. "Medical is overwhelmed." "Move the walking wounded to Section 5, Margaret ordered. "Make room for the critical cases. And tell everyone we have support coming. It is not just hope. It is real. Earth is sending help." Emma nodded and relayed the message. The colonists needed to know they were not forgotten. They needed to know that Earth had heard their call out in space. The human fleet continued its acceleration. In the engine rooms of each ship, engineers pushed the systems to the breaking point. Human engineering was built for punishment, but there were limits. One of the older ships, the Determination, began to show damage. Its engines were burning too hot. Its engines would not last much longer. The captain of the Determination was a woman named Victoria Price. She was old for a captain, 58 years old, with gray at her temples and lines around her eyes. She had flown every kind of ship humanity had built. She would not slow down now, not when people were dying. She pushed her engines harder and felt them start to fail. "Chief, I need those engines," she said into the communication system. Chief Engineer Robert Kane worked in the depths of the ship with sweat pouring down his face. The engines were breaking down around him. Metal was cracking. Systems were failing. But Robert pushed them anyway. He had been told that people needed this ship to arrive. He was going to make sure that happened, even if it killed him. "Giving you everything she has got, Captain," he reported. "She will hold. She will hold." In the command center on Earth, Admiral Gregory Hayes watched the fleet move. He was Lucas Hayes' uncle, though Lucas did not know this yet. The Admiral had made sure of it. A commander could not show favoritism. A commander had to be cold. The Admiral was very cold. He watched the fleet approach the outer rim and sent a final message to Captain Lucas Hayes. "Go save them," the message said simply. "Make them proud to be human." Lucas read the message and understood what it meant. It meant do whatever you have to do. It meant win. It meant make sure those people come home. He turned to his crew. "Battle stations," he ordered. "All weapons armed. This is not a drill." The human fleet prepared for war. The ships that humanity had hidden from the galaxy for decades were finally going to show their teeth. The Calmvir had dismissed humanity as primitive. The Calmvir had refused to help. The Calmvir would learn what a mistake that was. 42 minutes became 30 minutes. 30 minutes became 10. And then the Vexter swarms appeared on the human sensors. The creatures were there, surrounding the colony world, preparing for the final assault. The colony would fall in hours. Maybe less, but the human fleet was close now. Close enough to see. Close enough to fight. Close enough to save. Lucas Hayes took a breath and gave the order that would start everything. Jump into the system. All weapons armed. Maximum velocity. We are going to hit them like a hammer. The human fleet began its descent into hell. The human fleet emerged from jump space in an explosion of light and power. The Vexter swarms turned toward this new threat, their primitive minds registering danger. But they were too slow. Humans moved faster. Humans thought faster. Humans fought with a desperation that no creature born in comfort could match. Captain Lucas Hayes watched the tactical display and saw the enemy positions. The swarms were everywhere, a cloud of death surrounding the colony world. The situation should have been hopeless. The situation was not hopeless because humans did not accept hopelessness. All ships, weapons free, Lucas commanded. Focus fire on the densest concentrations. We are going to cut through them like a knife through paper. The human fleet opened fire. The weapons were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humans had built technology that was efficient, compact, and devastating. The first volley from the human warships killed thousands of Vexter creatures. The vacuum of space erupted with explosions. Swarms that had been alive one moment were scattered atoms the next. But the Vexter did not retreat. They swarmed forward, driven by instinct and hunger. Lieutenant Sarah Kennedy sat in the weapons control room of the Retaliation and moved her targeting computer across the battlefield. Every swarm she targeted died. Every order she gave resulted in destruction. The weapons systems responded perfectly to her commands. They were extensions of her will. She was the hammer, and the swarms were the anvils. "Clear Sector 7, she reported. The weapons fired. Sector 7 became a graveyard of vaporized creatures. But the swarms were learning. The creatures adapted to the human attack pattern. They began moving in ways that were harder to predict. They began using their bodies as shields for each other. The Vexter were not intelligent by galactic standards, but they were intelligent enough. They had survived in a harsh universe by adapting and evolving. Humans understood that. Humans had done the same thing. Humans were from a world that killed the weak and let the strong survive. Humans were Deathworlders, and they knew how to fight creatures that had learned from their environment. One of the human pilots, Flight Captain Daniel Foster, led his fighter wing deep into the swarm. His fighter was small and fast, built for agility instead of heavy armor. The wings around him moved in perfect formation, each pilot responding to his commands without hesitation. They had trained together for years. They knew each other's patterns. They moved like parts of a single organism. Daniel saw the swarms ahead and pushed his fighter faster. The creatures tried to intercept him, but he was too quick. He rolled between the attacking swarms, his weapons firing in controlled bursts. Each burst found a target. Each target died. The swarm tried to overwhelm him through numbers, but Daniel was not flying alone. His entire wing was behind him, covering his position, backing him up, making sure he came home. Closing in on the northern formation, Daniel reported. Engaging now. The human fighters drove a wedge through the swarm. It was a tactic that humans had used for centuries, a tactic that worked because it put pressure on the weakest points in the enemy formation. The fighters cut the swarm in half, forcing the creatures to fight in smaller groups instead of one overwhelming mass. On the ground, Commander Margaret Collins watched the space battle on her screens and felt hope flood through her chest. Earth had heard them. Earth had sent its warriors. The colony was not going to die in the darkness. "All soldiers, stand ready," she said to her people. "When the human forces arrive, we support them. We do not stop fighting until the last creature is gone." The colonists roared in response. Fear had turned into anger. Desperation had turned into determination. They were not going to die. They were going to live. The battle in space was becoming a massacre. The human fleet had the advantage of position, firepower, and speed. The Vexter had numbers and hunger. Numbers were not enough. Hunger could not overcome engineering. The swarms died in waves. For every human ship that took damage, 20 swarms were destroyed. The ratio grew worse for the creatures as the battle progressed. Captain Victoria Price watched her weapons lock onto targets and fire. The determination was taking damage, but it was giving back much more than it received. Her engineer, Robert Kane, kept the engines running even as they burned. The ship that was supposed to fall apart was holding together through pure willpower and human stubbornness, but the swarms were still dangerous. One of the human cruisers, the Intrepid, took a direct hit from a swarm formation. The creatures rammed the ship, trying to break through the hull with their bodies. The ship's weapons fired, destroying the swarms, but not before the hull was breached in 3 sections. The crew sealed the damaged areas and kept fighting. Humans had built their ships to survive damage. Humans had learned that the only ships worth flying were ships that could take punishment and keep flying. The Vexter leader, if the swarm could be said to have a leader, made a decision. The creatures could not win this fight. They could not overcome this new enemy. The swarm began to retreat, diving deeper into space, trying to escape the deadly human weapons. But escape was not possible. The human fleet did not let them go. Lucas watched the swarms die and gave one final order. Push them back to the edge of the system. Do not let them escape. We are going to end this. We are going to make sure these creatures never attack another human colony. The fleet pushed forward with ruthless efficiency. The Vexter swarm that had seemed endless hours before was cut into pieces, scattered, destroyed. The creatures fled in all directions. The human ships followed, cutting them down, making sure the threat was ended. Finally, after 4 hours of constant combat, the fighting stopped. The Vexter swarms were gone, dead or fled so far away that they were no longer a threat. The human fleet had lost 2 ships and had 3 more damaged badly. But they were alive. And more importantly, the colony was alive. Landing teams on the surface, Lucas ordered. I want soldiers down there in 5 minutes. We protect those colonists. We make sure they know they are safe. The first human landing craft descended through the atmosphere and touched down on Kepler 442b. The soldiers that came out were battle-hardened, experienced, ready for anything. But when they reached the bunker where Commander Margaret Collins waited, something unexpected happened. The colonists came out and cheered. They cheered for the humans who had saved them. They cheered for Earth. They cheered for the strength and courage that had come from the stars to rescue them. Margaret Collins saluted the first soldier she saw, a woman named Lieutenant Grace Wilson. "Thank you," Margaret said simply. "Thank you for coming." Grace Wilson returned the salute. "We heard you calling," she said. "We came as fast as we could." And for the first time since the swarms arrived, everyone in the colony knew they were truly safe. The message reached the Galactic Council like a shockwave. Every species that monitored the outer rim knew what had happened. The Vexter swarm, which had devastated civilizations with ease before, had been destroyed by humans. Destroyed completely. Destroyed in a way that made victory seem inevitable from the beginning. The council chamber fell into chaos. Vexter the Wise stood in the center of the council chamber and felt something he had never felt before. He felt fear. The humans were supposed to be weak. The humans were supposed to be primitive. Instead, they had revealed that they possessed military technology and tactics that rivaled the greatest powers in the galaxy. Worse, they had used that power to save their people. The entire galaxy had seen it. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds had watched the humans fight, and the humans had won. The Valorian representative spoke first, a massive being of purple skin and 8 arms. The humans sent a hidden military force to save their colony. This reveals a truth the Council must face. We do not know the full extent of human capabilities. The Shylock delegate, a creature that resembled a thinking squid, spoke next. The question is not their capabilities. The question is their intentions. They have shown they are willing and able to project force across interstellar distances. They have shown they are willing to fight. The question is whether they are willing to fight us. Vexter tried to speak, to control the narrative, but the Council would not be controlled. Species after species began asking questions. Where did the humans come from? Why were their ships so advanced? Why had Earth kept this military force secret? And most importantly, why had the Calnver blocked the distress call? That was the question that would not go away. A new message arrived at the Council, transmitted directly from Captain Lucas Hayes to the entire assembly. The message was short and powerful. It said, "We know the truth. We know that the Calnver suppressed our distress signal. We know they chose to let our people die. We are coming to tell you this directly. We are sending representatives to the Council." The Council chamber erupted. Species shouted over each other. Alarms were raised about a possible human invasion. Security forces were put on alert. The Calnver tried to maintain control, but control was slipping away like sand through fingers. 3 days later, a human delegation arrived at the Council chamber. Captain Lucas Hayes was there, still wearing his battle uniform. Commander Margaret Collins was there, representing the colony. And Admiral Gregory Hayes was there, transmitted as a video feed from Earth, representing the human government. They were not a large delegation, but they did not need to be large. They had power. They had proof. Lucas stood before the Council and presented evidence. He showed how the distress signal had been blocked. He showed the orders that Vexter had given. He showed the decision that the Council had made to let humans die. The evidence was clear. The evidence was undeniable. Worst of all for the Calnver, the evidence was true. The humans sent a distress call, Lucas said, his voice steady and cold. They asked for help. The Calnver refused. The Calnver decided that our lives did not matter. The Calnver decided that fear was more important than compassion. And because of that decision, the Calnver demonstrated what kind of leadership the Galactic Council has. This is leadership based on fear. This is leadership based on prejudice. This is leadership that should end. The Council erupted again, but this time with a different energy. Species that had been intimidated by the Calnver for centuries began to speak. They talked about other times they had been threatened. They talked about other times they had been dismissed. They talked about the burden of living under Calnver rule. The anger that had been building for centuries was finally being released. Vexter tried to defend himself. He talked about the dangers of advanced human weaponry. He talked about the need for careful leadership. He talked about the strategic necessity of sometimes making hard choices. But no one was listening. The Council had turned against him. The Calnver could not control the situation through strength because they had already shown their weakness. They had shown that they would let innocents die for political convenience. That was not the action of strong leaders. That was the action of cowards. Admiral Gregory Hayes watched all of this from Earth and made a decision that would change everything. He spoke over the communication system to Lucas, his message heard by the entire Council. "We could demand revenge," the Admiral said. We could demand the Kelmvir fall from power. We could demand punishment for those who let our people die. But we will not. The humans have not come to the Galactic Council to destroy. The humans have come to build. We demand two things. First, we demand that the Kelmvir resign from leadership. Second, we demand that the Galactic Council adopt a new charter that ensures no species can suppress the calls for help from other species. We want to work with you. We want to be part of this galaxy. But we will not do it under a system that allows species to die when help could save them. The Council was stunned. They expected the humans to demand power. They expected the humans to demand punishment. Instead, the humans were demanding justice and fairness. They were demanding a better system for everyone. One by one, species agreed to support the human proposal. The Valorians agreed. The Shylocks agreed. The Merchant Coalition agreed. The Military Alliance of the Krull agreed. The only species that could not agree was the Kelmvir. And the Kelmvir found themselves completely alone. Vexthor stood before the council and saw the end of Kelmvir dominance. He saw 500 years of power coming to an end, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The humans had not conquered them through force. The humans had conquered them through something far more powerful. The humans had exposed the truth, and truth was a weapon that could not be defeated by technology or strength. The vote was taken. Vexthor resigned. The Kelmvir stepped down from leadership, and the council voted unanimously to accept humanity's proposal. A new charter was created. A new system was established. And for the first time in 500 years, the Kelmvir were not in charge of the galaxy. Commander Margaret Collins watched from the chamber and felt tears in her eyes. The colony that had nearly died would live. It would not just live. It would live in a galaxy that was more just, more fair, more willing to help. That was worth dying for. That was worth fighting for. And they had achieved it not through revenge, but through courage and truth. Lucas Hayes stood beside Margaret and looked at the council. The humans had come to the Outer Rim to save their people. They had ended up changing the galaxy. They had revealed something that every species needed to know. Humans were not just warriors. Humans were warriors with hearts. Humans were warriors with principles. And that was far more powerful than any weapon could ever be. The chamber was empty now. Vexthor was gone. The Kelmvir delegation had departed, their tails between their legs, their power reduced to nothing. In the silence that followed their departure, the council began its work of rebuilding. For 500 years, the system had been broken. For 500 years, fear had been the currency of leadership. Now there was a chance to try something different. Captain Lucas Hayes was appointed the first human representative to the Galactic Council. It was not a position he wanted, but it was a responsibility he accepted. He moved to the Council Station, a massive space station that orbited a neutral planet. The station was called Nexus, and it was where the future of the galaxy would be decided. Lucas understood the weight of that responsibility. His first act was to welcome new species to the Council. Species that had been excluded before. Species that had been afraid to speak. Species that had lived under the shadow of Kelmvir dominance for centuries. The Council grew larger. The voices grew louder. And the decisions became harder because they had to consider more perspectives. Commander Margaret Collins returned to the colony on Kepler 442b. The settlers had survived. Most of them had survived. Some had not, and their memory would be honored forever. But the colony would be rebuilt. It would be stronger. It would be safer. And it would serve as a symbol of what humanity could accomplish. Margaret took on the role of colony governor, leading her people forward. She built memorials for those who had fallen. She organized the reconstruction. She made sure that the sacrifice meant something, One of the first decisions the new council made was to establish a mutual defense pact. If any species called for help, others had to respond. The treaty was called the Accord of Shared Responsibility. It meant that no colony would be left alone to die. It meant that distance and fear could no longer be excuses for inaction. It meant that the galaxy had taken a step towards something better, but implementing the treaty was not easy. There were practical problems. How would species defend each other across light years of distance? How would communication work? How would coordination happen? Lucas appointed himself to head the committee that would answer these questions. He worked with engineers from a dozen different species. They worked together, sharing technology, sharing ideas, creating something that none of them could have created alone. Human military technology was revealed to the council. Most of it was held back, kept secret, kept as a deterrent against future conquest. But some of it was shared. Humans taught other species about ship design that emphasized armor over theoretical perfection. Humans shared weapons designs that prioritized reliability over exotic power. Other species shared their knowledge in return. The Valorians taught humans about biological engineering. The Shylocks shared their understanding of quantum technology. The Merchant Coalition taught humans about trade and economics. For the first time in 500 years, the galaxy was actually cooperating. On Earth, the revelation of humanity's hidden military power caused shock waves. The government announced that humanity would become an active member of the galactic community. This meant resources would be devoted to the council. This meant soldiers would be stationed at Nexus. This meant that humanity's future was bound to the galaxy in a way that could not be undone. But it also meant that humanity would have influence. It meant that the systems that had been broken for so long could finally be fixed. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Celebrations erupted in every major city. Humans had been alone on their world, isolated by the darkness and by fear. Now humanity had made contact with the galaxy, and the galaxy had recognized humanity's value. It was a moment of transformation. It was the day that humans became something more than they had been. Lieutenant Sarah Kennedy led a contingent of human soldiers to the Nexus Station. They would be the military force that backed up the new council. Sarah and her soldiers trained with troops from other species. They learned how to fight alongside aliens. They learned how other species thought, how they moved, how they solved problems. And they taught other species about human creativity, human determination, human refusal to accept defeat. One day, Sarah was training with a Valorian commander named Krelath. Krelath was twice as large as Sarah and had superior strength. But Sarah defeated him in combat through speed and tactics. When it was over, Krelath helped Sarah to her feet. "Your species is remarkable," Krelath said. "You come from a harsh world, but this does not make you cruel. You have strength, but this does not make you arrogant." The Kelmir did not understand what they were dealing with. "We come from Earth," Sarah replied. "Earth teaches you that life is precious. Life is hard to build and easy to destroy. Humans learned a long time ago to respect life, even while being willing to fight for it." Daniel Foster was promoted to Wing Commander. He led the human fighter squadron that would defend Nexus Station. His pilots came from every military in the world. Americans worked alongside British pilots. Indian pilots flew next to Brazilian pilots. Australian pilots fought with Japanese pilots. For the first time in human history, the entire species was united in one cause. And that unity made them stronger. But there were still challenges. Not every species was happy about the changes. The former Kelmir allies were unhappy about losing power. There were accidents, incidents, and near misses. But the accord of shared responsibility held. When trouble emerged, multiple species responded. When fighting started, allies showed up to help. The system that humans had pushed for was working. Slowly but surely, Lucas Hayes sat in the council chamber one day and reflected on everything that had happened. 6 months ago, humans were unknown to the galactic community. Now humans were central to every major decision. The shift in power had been rapid and complete. But Lucas did not feel victorious. He felt the weight of new responsibilities. He knew that humanity's role in the galaxy would define the next centuries. He knew that what happened now would echo through history. A message came to him from Admiral Gregory Hayes, his uncle and the head of Earth's military. The message said, "You have done well, nephew. But remember that power without compassion is just domination dressed up in different clothes. Keep humanity on the path of justice. Keep us from becoming what we defeated." Lucas read the message and understood. The war with the Vexter was over. The battle with the Kelmvir was won. But the real challenge was just beginning. The challenge was to use power wisely. The challenge was to build a better galaxy. The challenge was to prove that humans were worthy of the position they had been given. Margaret Collins stood on the colony world and looked up at the night sky. She could see Nexus Station shining in the distance, a beacon of hope. She could see other ships in orbit, ships from different species, working together to defend the colony. The swarms were gone. The threat was ended. And in its place was something new, something better, something that would last. The story of humanity had changed forever on the day that the ISS pioneers sent a distress signal into the darkness. On that day, humans revealed themselves to the galaxy. On that day, humans showed that they were willing to fight for what they believed in. On that day, humans proved that they were not just survivors. They were protectors. They were warriors of the light. And the galaxy would never be the same again.